Все самое важное всегда тебя найдет. Еще одна трагедия, которой можно было избежать.
HEINO often encounters certain difficulties, such as insufficient damage, an inability to quickly switch forms, and being killed while using his ultimate. We have analyzed each of these specific situations. 1. Insufficient damage. HEINO's damage is lacking because his skill 1 takes too long to stack marks, leading to an inability to deal continuous damage. It is worth becoming familiar with how to use each of his skills. 2. Unable to quickly switch forms. HEINO's inability to quickly switch forms is due to not understanding his ranged and melee forms and to incorrect match strategy. 3. Death during ultimate. The main reason HEINO suddenly dies during his ultimate is that his health is too low to withstand burst damage from the enemies. It's important to grasp the timing of this skill.
Сопротивляться бесполезно.
Playing with HEINO requires being familiar with his gameplay and establishing a clear match strategy. First, HEINO can use skill 1 in range form to trigger marks for continuous poking. Next, skill 2 lets him switch form or pull enemies. In melee form, skills 1 and 2 are used mainly to recover health and stack marks. His ultimate rewinds time, allowing him to leave the battlefield and mark enemies in range. Combined with skill 1, this enhances damage output.
Не нужно слов.
Range damage output. HEINO's range skill 1 has a very long range and can use minion waves and monsters to easily stack marks. Skill 1's tracking locates marked targets within a 90-degree area. This makes it easy to mark targets and increase damage output during combat. Melee recovery. The more marked targets HEINO hits with skill 1 in melee form, the greater his health recovery is. When fighting enemies up close, he should try to situate himself near minion waves and monsters.
Любимый клинок никогда не ржавеет.
Early game. In the early game, HEINO should focus on stable leveling by switching forms and using skill 1's marking for lane clearing and jungling. Careful play can obtain gold and level advantages for faster development. Mid-game. In the mid-game, HEINO should continue to focus on leveling. If there are no jungle resources, he can use skill 2's dash or rewind time to help establish an advantage on other lanes. Late game. HEINO should be decently tanky and will deal good damage once he is fully equipped during late game. He should focus on pulling in teamfights. Before fights, he can use his marking to poke enemies. His ultimate can trick enemies into using crucial skills and mark multiple enemies. This can also assist teammates in finishing off enemies.
Никогда никому не подчиняйся.
HEINO needs to choose the right skill combo for each situation. Here are several combos suited to different combat scenarios.
Я не верю, что судьбу не изменить.
Start with skill 1, then use skill 2 to maintain a ranged output distance from the enemy and mark them from afar. When chased by multiple enemies, use his ultimate to leave the battle briefly and mark enemies. Then skill 2 to rejoin the fray and attack enemies in range.
Сердце человека ярче всего проявляется в несчастье.
Use skill 2 to change form and enter battle, then use skill 1 and a basic attack to mark enemies. Next, use skills 2 and 1 again to approach the enemy and deal damage while recovering health. Then another basic attack to boost damage. Once enemies have used their crucial skills, or when his health is below 50%, HEINO can use his ultimate again to quickly avoid damage and recover health. If there are fewer enemies, he can find an opportunity to use skill 2 to switch to melee form, then use 2, 1, BA to repeatedly poke the enemy.
Ход событий можно развернуть в одно мгновение.
This helps HEINO stack melee marks when he needs to enhance damage output. Skill 2 lets him approach the enemy frontline, entering combat as he changes forms. Next, skill 1 is used to stack marks across a large area. Then he uses skill 2 to switch to range form, and skill 1 to continuously poke marked enemies. When enemies get close, he uses his ultimate to escape.
Я не опозорю клан судьбы!
HEINO has no crowd control to stop enemies escaping. As such, teammates' cooperation is essential. It is important to know which lineups suit HEINO. Teammates with numerous crowd control skills such as Mozi, Lu Shan, and Lian Po can use their initiation crowd controls to help HEINO mark enemies. He can then use skill 1 repeatedly to deal damage from the backline. Enemy heroes like Agudo and Milady, who have summoning skills and lack movement, are good targets for HEINO's skill 1. It also stacks marks when it hits summoned objects, which can greatly increase his damage. Arlie's skill 2 and Musashi's skill 1 can block HEINO's skill 1, thereby reducing his damage output. Heroes with strong dash skills and burst damage, such as Nakaruru and Wukong, can obliterate HEINO. He needs to use his ultimate to avoid fighting them.